Last week, Noah kicked off a discussion about the dumbing down of novels, including the diminution in serious fiction, but also the degree to which even our genre fiction, which used to be somewhat serious, is increasingly base, increasingly meretricious. I want to talk a little bit more about that. I think we make fairly intelligent books here at Inkshares. Yes, they are predominantly genre, but they're what we think of in the industry as thinking person's genre. The writing is elevated, the world's specific, and despite being genre, it takes time to explore aspects of the human condition that, in many cases, push it towards some of the traditions of literary fiction. Our writers, by and large, also bring a level of prose consistent with the standards of literary fiction. We've been doing this for 10 years with a fair amount of success. We have books over 100,000 units. Our books are translated into language after language by the foreign divisions of the major houses, and they have sold to the biggest studios and streamers, resulting in Emmy nominations and multiple seasons at places like Apple. But I have, over time, and particularly over the past few years, noticed the kind of inflection in the voices of people when they discuss our books or books like them. They use the word smart with a certain hesitancy, like it's off-putting, like people might not like it, like it's too civilized, like people would prefer something dumber. The recent birth of children in the Inkshares families forestalled us from attending the London Book Fair this month, but I noticed it rather acutely a year ago at the fair, when friend after friend, colleague after colleague said they weren't acquiring anything other than spicy romantasy. We had just interviewed Nigel Newton, the founder of Bloomsbury, known for being the first to publish J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter, about the success of Sarah J. Maas, now in the peloton of their front list. And on the way out of Olympia, I recall seeing one of the greatest living publishers sat beneath a very spicy poster for a book called For Whom the Bell, that's with an E on bell, tolls. Maybe he had just been up late at the Canongate party and I'm reading too much into it. Or maybe he had internalized that an industry built on Hemingway and Faulkner, and yes, Christie, had come to shill fiction about well-hung minotaurs and reverse harems. Lately, I've thought about this in terms of Christopher Huang's new book, A Pretender's Murder, his third book with us, and the sequel to his 2018 hit, A Gentleman's Murder. It's a dazzling and well-researched piece of historical mystery fiction. It takes you into the 1920s, war trauma, the incipient rise of psychoanalysis, race relations, class relations, interwar tensions, contemporary European history. I know how much historical research goes into these books because I talk about it with Christopher all the time. There is no on-page sex and certainly no minotaurs of ample endowment. There is only a 100,000-word-plus game of mystery cat and mouse between novelist and reader in an intricately constructed world of drama and history. While the book will succeed, it will do so almost despite it being a snowball of genre intelligence rolled into a Hades defined by tastelessness and idiocy as much as, yes, heat and flame. The easiest thing to say regarding this literary devolution is stop doing that and be smarter. The hardest thing to do is properly define the problem, analyze how we got here, and figure out how to get somewhere else better, to return to things that made us think as much as feel, and to actually restore the connection between those things, thinking and feeling. Let's take that second question first. How did we get here? How did we get to stupid? Most things that are bad, and bad at scale, are multifactorial. How did we get to World War I, the war that traumatizes our protagonists in A Pretender's Murder? The assassination of the Archduke? Sure. But also out-of-control nationalism, tensions between imperialist powers, and fundamentally, a balance of powers alliance system that means belligerence against any was belligerence for all. How then did we navigate the arteries to idiocy? What doors did we walk through? What chutes did we fall down? The following are merely suppositions, things I've seen both personally and professionally, and discussed with others. They are in order of vague chronology, not necessarily importance, and they aren't supported by any data beyond the data of observation. Otherwise stated, they are things that I think and that I know other people whose opinions I respect think. 1. Beginning in the 1980s and accelerating since is video games. Video games are bright, they're loud, they release dopamine, they are narratively poor by comparison to books. In my 42 years on this planet, they were V1 of stupid. Our parents were right. They rotted our minds. Or rather, they began to rot our minds. Because, well, I know a lot of people that played a lot of video games that had no trouble knuckling through Hemingway in high school or Faulkner in college, and who still routinely read long novels today. So, for a good number, video games were bad, but not fatal. It tended to make you dumber rather than smart, but you were probably still fine if you were starting off with a good education in a world that tended to cultivate attention span, which may have been the world of the 80s and 90s, but is not today's world. What came next was expansion cable and the beginning of reality TV with it. Yes, there was already Phil Donahue and then Jerry Springer or Ricky Lake, just as there was All My Children long before today's verticals. But at a certain point, a change in scale is a change in state. Expansion cable meant that the TV didn't turn off. There was always something on. And as carriage deals brought more channels to the air, more and more of it was filled with not just benign reruns of 50s, 60s, and 70s classics, but rather cheap, unscripted series. Just as now, it was rarely the smartest thing that went viral. Right as we had the birth of premium TV with The Sopranos, we had the forerunners of social media stupidity right there on the boob tube in disposable, unscripted series. Part of the road to stupid is the abandonment of the desire to aspire to high culture, and what is at the core of high culture, the cultivation of virtue in the Greek sense, to sing, to sculpt, to paint, to ascertain and understand and posit. We began to forget to aspire to something beyond the mean, or even less, the lowest common denominator. This is the expansion TV-driven warm-up for the runaway stupidity of today's social media world. But here also begins a second problem, a second front in the war to kill smart, which is the loss of boredom. The final nail in the coffin of boredom began to be hammered in 2007 with the launch of the iPhone. It ended a world in which people simply sat around bored. Boredom is a critical human experience. It forces introspection, which forces thought, which forces deep thinking, which forces, amongst other things, creativity. Think of Dickinson sitting in her bedroom in Amherst, or Melville grinding away as a bank clerk, or Faulkner working the night shift at a Mississippi power company. You don't get those books if they were doom-scrolling Instagram every available moment of every day. But it's not just a problem for creators. It's a problem for readers and viewers because constantly being fed content, and increasingly bright content, not a text-based ebook, but say Candy Crush, diminishes an appreciation for stimuli at lower levels. If you're always being fed raw sugar, you don't develop much of a palate for less sweet things. Nobody is bored anymore, and what it takes to keep us stimulated is increasingly loud things that diminish our attention for nuance and sustained thought. For those of us who grew up in the 90s, when the TV turned off or the video games turned off, the world got quiet again. It gave our brains a chance to recover from the bad stuff, just like if you stop consuming sugar, your blood sugar will likely normalize. The world of nonstop shorts and AirPods, it's never quiet. Importantly, we haven't been in a steady state since 2007, but rather a geometrically advancing state of ever-stimulation and overstimulation. Obviously, the second and third generation of social media has taken it to another level. Algorithms train us to react to a number of terrible things sequentially. First, they train us to only react to divisive, dialed-up, polarizing, and flaming content. More goodbye nuance, more goodbye reason, more goodbye thinking. Second, they train us to watch things in shorter and shorter bursts. We take these patterns with us when we leave social media. It's not even worth dwelling on this because it's something we experience as much as we experience gravity. We react to highly emotional content tuned to our bubble and need it in bite-sized amounts, lest our intellectual teeth crack under the pressure of even medium-length mastication. Algorithms begin on the internet, but are now fully in the business of story, because the old-school studio world in which creatives charted the future is one where executives now use algorithms built on retrospective datasets. The problem is that the dumber the dataset gets, the harder we are now locked into a dumber present. All while attention spans send people off the long-form diet and into shorter-form social content, whether pods, shorts, verticals, or whatever else. And somewhere in here is also a story about how video, where stupid seems to take easier route, became the dominant expressive lens of our society. That which had long been a tail to reading now wags the dog's body and head to the point of barking for it. In an attempt to maintain relevancy, publishing has chased TV and film, which was chasing social video off the cliff of dumb. Another way of looking at this, which is something I think about a lot, is when the offline world begins to take on the character of broken online culture. Think about a civilized town hall in the New Hampshire primary in which members of both parties and independents show up to ask candidates questions. That, for the avoidance of doubt, is normal culture. Now think of a political debate on X or Blue Sky about the same issues. Do they seem different? They do, because people don't act offline, or at least they didn't used to act offline in the insane way that anonymized dipshits do online. Or think about a book event in which an author quietly reads a chapter and then people get book signed and talk to each other about what they have loved about the author's world and opus. Now, go read even a 3-star review of a really excellent novel on Goodreads. It's the same problem, just in 2 different areas of culture. Offline, good, normal. Online, bad, aberrant. Except now, online culture has followed us into the offline world. Somewhere in here, yet another front in the war against intelligence and attention span and thought. The news itself got not just more partisan, but dumber. A country that was capable of reading 10,000-word long-form journalism, meaningful, well-researched, thoughtful stuff, went the way of the BuzzFeed listicle. We ate up the clickbait of new media like famished koi, to such a degree, indeed, that old media started to play a subtler version of the same pandering dumb game. We live in a world today that predominantly consumes headlines and seems to know so little about itself that it wouldn't recognize its own actual reflection should the Baudelarian mirror of art be held up to it like Dorian Gray's portrait. And again, all of this is happening over and over again at ever-increasing rates because the dumb, polarizing, attention-depleting stuff we're watching isn't just on a TV that you turn on here or there, but rather on phones that accompany us everywhere, constantly asking for our attention. It reminds me a little bit of that famous line from Hemingway's The Sun Also Rises about how the character Mike Campbell went bankrupt. Slowly, then, all of a sudden. If we were on the slow road to stupid, we are now on an express lane, a bullet train. Somewhere in here, of course, we need to talk about the death of the gatekeepers, of disintermediation. Inkshares, at its inception, was talked about in many places, from Fast Company to Publishers Weekly to even the New York Times, as a disintermediator in publishing. What that meant was that there were ways around the gatekeepers like agents and publishers. I guess that was true in some senses and maybe not in others. I think what they were positing more precisely than gatekeeping was the loss of filtering. Maybe it's the same thing. The gate kept the savages, the bad things, out. But the publishers did publish plenty of Fabio romance, so it can't be that they kept all the smut out. And here they are today, with their top divisions paying top dollar to acquire the smuttiest, spiciest smut. They sell more spice today than the Dutch East India Company did in the 18th century. And that's the issue, really. When people with taste, or mostly with taste, were the only ones capable of ubiquitizing a book, stupid was less acquirable. Let me say that more simply. The market for selling smart was easier when it didn't have to compete with stupid at every turn, which is to say, before phones and the internet could deliver stupid at every turn. And the net thing we can take away from it is that the fault lies not in our stars, but in ourselves. We, or at least many of us, when truly given a chance between smart and stupid, choose the latter today. And we might have then, we just didn't see it on the table at our local bookstore. If you want the year that began to change in some ways, it was 2011, when 50 Shades of Grey, a book that began its life as a piece of hardcore Twilight fanfiction, so spicy it got E.L. James tossed off the community website, went viral after being self-published, and got picked up by what would shortly become the merged Penguin Random House. Somewhere in here is also a story about a generation of school administrators who relaxed standards, who started assigning sections of books rather than whole books, and English teachers who refused to fail kids who didn't read their assigned Hemingway because they feared an F would mean they wouldn't be able to attend college, where they would importantly be trained to hate Western traditions and recite Edward Said and Noam Chomsky rather than Bernard Lewis and Edmund Burke. We forgot to hold people to higher standards, and certainly the standards of culture that define the intellectual ascendance of the enlightened West. And that, the erosion of taste, the erosion of intelligence, the erosion of boredom, the erosion of attention span, the erosion of standards of excellence, the erosion of respect for Western culture is how you have kids graduating from college who can't read a whole book. And what that means for the people that make books, novels, should, well, be pretty fucking obvious. I want to stay on that last bit for a moment. The topic of dumb and the ascendancy of dumb, or the murder of smart, is broad already. So I hesitate to bring up that trifling matter of Western culture, which is so loaded. But it's not an unimportant part of the problem. I have some familiarity with the pathogenesis of autoimmune disease, as I both have Graves' disease and other family members with other autoimmune diseases. A lot of emergent research indicates that the prevalence of autoimmune issues today has to do with our highly aggressive immune systems that are evolutionarily trained to be fighting off pathogens of all types all the time, and what they do in a world where so many pathogens have been suppressed. That's part of the reason why people in the less developed world have fewer autoimmune issues. They've grown up fighting more real enemies and continue to fight real enemies, meaning they can tell hostile from host. We are today living in a very silly America, where very few of us have been called on to face real hostiles, and because of that, we can't recognize valuable host culture. Sure, critique things. Foucault's application of Bentham's panopticon to society is brilliant. Indeed, he said a lot of really smart things in between molesting boys and doing PR for an Iranian revolution that went on to restore the hijab and, continuing through today, hangs gay men from cranes. My point here is that in defending a society from threat, you take stock of why its defense matters, what that society represents, and what it stands for. When you don't have to do that, you get to sit around inventing new gender identities and deconstructing institutions to the detriment of any appreciation for the countless generations that built the thing you are standing on. In Kharkiv, a safe space is a place where you don't get killed by a ballistic missile. Said simply, and I am certainly no ardent social conservative, you cannot properly understand the descent into dumb without understanding it in the context of an attack at an autoimmune level on the basics of Western society, a big part of which is the novel and the role it plays in both discourse and diversion. I'm sure I missed a lot, but let's move on to what stupid actually is. What is stupid? This may sound strange after the preceding, but a little bit of stupid never killed anyone, just like a little bit of bacon or sugar also never killed anyone. Some things can be silly. Monty Python is silly. Airplane is silly. Clue is silly. Those are actually some of my favorite movies. Some things can be nothing other than titillating or violent or silly. We have some pretty base impulses as humans, and requiring content to reflect a puritanical set of values seems averse to a great number of American traditions, except, I guess, the Puritanism of America's birth in the birth of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. But there are so many different versions of stupid. How are we even to begin to think about it? Is stupid defined in contrast to smart? And what is smart? Or must stupid be defined on its own terms? Is it enough not to define it, but to define it in terms of what it looks like? Is it then sufficient to simply point it out when you see it or define it by its effects? None of these seem to be stupid questions. Something I think about a lot in terms of stupid is the term thought-terminating cliche, a term coined by Robert J. Lifton in his mid-century study of Maoist propaganda. This is when the most far-reaching and complex of human problems are compressed into a brief, highly reductive, definitive-sounding phrase, easily memorized and expressed. The effect of these brief, repetitive phrases is to abruptly halt critical thinking, shut down debate, and to discourage independent analysis of complex issues. There are so many ways in which a term used to describe Maoist propaganda in the 1960s seems to strangely relate to our free market entertainment economy today, compressed into brief snippets, highly reductive, easily expressed. But more than anything, I come back to this term, thought ending, thought terminating. The net effect of all these cliches is to end thoughts and thinking. It is slowly making us NPCs in the game of life. At the core of this are two separate problems. One, that our entertainment is entirely about stimulating us with action or sex or whatever else. It's all feels, no thought. The feel actually cuts off the thought. The second is that it tells us what to think rather than posing questions to us. It is the stuff of feels, not thought, not discourse, all wrapped up on a spectrum that runs from pedantic to propaganda. Think about it. What was the last mega sensation piece of straight fiction or literary fiction that broke out? Something that made it to a point of cultural ubiquity simply based on its ability to capture and depict the human condition. Something that felt like Our Time's Faulkner or Hemingway. I don't mean books that are inflated by Oprah or Reese and their book clubs, or books that take off in some segment of the market like women's fiction. And I don't mean the elevated beach read that we pass off as serious fiction by way of upscale prose and an elegant cover. So, sorry, books like Lessons in Chemistry and Where the Crawdads Sing failed this test on multiple accounts. I mean, what was the last piece of heavy, thought-requiring fiction that we read as a nation, men and women both, and said, yes, the questions this raises speak to all of us? One would think that All the Light We Cannot See probably counts in here at 15 million copies sold worldwide, nearly half of that in North America. But that was 2014. 12 years ago. The Goldfinch, 13 years ago, skewed heavily female with only 3 million copies worldwide. The Covenant of Water, most recently, only 2 million copies worldwide, and that's with the help of Oprah. We can talk about what constitutes stupid with guests coming up. But I want to say this. Publishers today ought not follow the TV and film studios and social media platforms off the cliff called stupid. We, all of us, each of us, owe a debt to Gutenberg to do more with his press. To sacrifice a legacy of thought and art and culture, and yes, thought-provoking fun on the unit-selling capacity of thought-terminating tropes is to proactively surrender one of the greatest industries of the West to a horde of engorged minotaurs. What then of the road out of stupid? We can't, like Theseus, simply retrace our steps back out of this labyrinth of idiocy and the engorged minotaur at its center. We can, however, appreciate that it took the collective knee bend of many different groups to get us here. It began with authors who decided to play to the lowest common denominator and share their love for pornography, derivative tropes, and comma splices with us. Thank you so much. It took readers deciding that asking little of your mind was fine. It took agents and publishers also deciding that playing a role in the dumbing down of reading was justified in the pursuit of profit. Not all, sure, but by and large, it was an abdication of taste-making in a world increasingly defined by disintermediation and the abundance of cheap, dumb things that rubbed us in parts they wouldn't or mostly wouldn't. And it was reviewers, unmentioned thus far, deciding that to maintain their relevancy in this world, they would take a masthead that had put its imprimatur on the great literary luminaries of yore and use it to sanctify stupid. This comes, of course, after a multi-decade dumbing down of both broader cultural standards and educational standards, including an autoimmune-type attack on our cultural central nervous system. One not unworthy of critique, but also so worthy of so much admiration and preservation. Don't forget a great many teachers, including a great many teachers and school systems that spend hundreds of millions of dollars on inventing reading programs that didn't work when phonics, which incidentally wasn't racist, worked quite fine. That plays a role here too. Of course, how the fuck are you going to have readers if they can't read? All of this in a world where technology companies ensured that you could not get a breath of boredom with which to nourish that most endangered creature, an attention span. Everywhere that we weren't consuming long-form dumb, we are consuming short-form, highly emotionally charged dumb on our phones. Or whether it's the world of news or literature, Cronkite and Faulkner are unseeable from the aft of the SS Stupid that we now find ourselves aboard. So what is the ascent out of stupid? Here are some things that we want to talk to guests about upcoming. 1. We need to build readers, which means building readers from a young age and the cultivation of attention span. Read your kids books. Read them long books. Teach them to read so they can read themselves books as young as possible. Any battle about the substance of reading is downstream from our maintaining the capacity to and interest in reading. Cultivate comfort with low levels of stimulation. Teach them to do things with the boredom. Teach them that boredom is okay. This ends my turn as Emily Oster. 2. We need to fix the rot in the academy. English departments and MFA programs need to stop interrogating how many pronouns can fit on the head of a pen and cultivate a generation of writers who have lived life and have experiences to share. Stories about difficulties in life can be great, Angela's Ashes being a prime example. Stories about other in society can be fantastic, Remains of the Day being one of them, because other can mean many things. And yes, there are a great many such stories that hinge on the matters of gender and race. But the perpetual publishing of grievance culture runs completely parallel to a decline in reading. There's more than just correlation there. The same goes for the remaining reviews of major papers, which is to say, cover things people actually want to read. Maybe begin by hiring people that look like a cross-section of the readers you should want to appeal to. 3. The great educators out there need to stand up to the broken administrators and administrations and restore the teaching of great books inside of an appreciation for the literary arc of the West. Teach the classics. Keep teaching the classics. Require that they be read in their entirety. Not excerpts, certainly not shorts. There's a reason they're called the classics, and the answer isn't patriarchy or oppression. And yes, if there are new classics, which there most certainly are, teach those too. You can critique America while also appreciating it. By the way, however imperfect, this is still the greatest country in the whole fucking world, which is why people are still willing to die walking across a desert to get here. And that probably means that appreciation should be at least as large, if not greater than our capacity or desire to critique it. 4. Publishers need to reform. What publishers do is immensely valuable. It's still valuable. We cultivate, we taste-make, we brand, we market. We ought not bend our knee to an algorithm that has taught our children to eat detergent and taught young women, our daughters, to alternate between starving themselves to death and lip-syncing while jumping up and down in a shirt that barely fit their favorite American Girl doll once upon a time. Trump got elected because the Democrats had staked out positions that 20% of the country agreed with, leaving Trump, like him or not, with the other 80%. Broadly speaking, publishing has done the same. Here's a thought experiment. If you built a publishing house today, one of resource and stature, with a population of acquiring editors that demographically and politically reflected America, it would outperform everything else around it simply because of its ability to have an honest conversation internally. As long as the publishing industry continues as is, which is skewed in all the ways we know, it will continue to decline. 5, to all of you influencers out there, because you actually are influencers, read something interesting. Maybe something even old. Write a book report about it. Remember, 5 paragraphs like they taught you, maybe, in school. Go read something smart. We'd start with Christopher Huang's A Pretender's Murder. Let us know. We'll be happy to send you a copy. 6, counter to point 5. To readers, you need not depend on influencers. Stop being influenced and think independently. Cultivate your own judgment. We have to remember that we, as content consumers, have the power to send a message to content makers, both traditional and new, about what we value. Stop buying romantasy, and the major houses will stop churning it out at such an incredible rate. Stop watching bad movies, and they'll make better movies, or at least try. Stop listening to necrotic, fascistic podcast hosts on either side of the political horseshoe, and their ad revenue will likely flow to more serious people. A nation that can't tell the difference or doesn't care about the difference between serious fiction and spicy fiction deserves where it gets put on the front table of its bookshops. And a nation that can't tell the difference between one battle after another or The English Patient or even Gladiator in vying for and winning Best Picture deserves the same. And of course, a nation that can't distinguish or doesn't care about the difference between Walter Cronkite and Tucker Carlson deserves the vitriol and propaganda it receives dressed up as news. 7, I almost forgot, to the writers. We need to recognize that as Americans, we are not people by our nature who wait for institutions. You don't need an MFA to be a writer. Hemingway didn't need it. Faulkner didn't need it. Cormac didn't need it. Neither did Shirley Jackson or Agatha Christie or John le Carré. You don't need their permission, and you shouldn't want their blessing. Bostonians didn't wait for the assembly of the Continental Army to toss all that disgusting British tea in the Boston Harbor. And you don't need an MFA administrator, publisher, or reviewer to declare you a novelist. Do the thing. It's never been easier. And when you're done, put it on Inkshares. We'd love to read it. I want to add a coda to all of this on the politics of this essay's assailing of dumb. We are 30 episodes into this podcast, growing week by week. Inkshares itself is an open platform, but as story executives, we interact with our colleagues in publishing across the world and in television and film each and every day. Unedited, this podcast is about giving insights into the conversations we have, the things we love, the things that work, the things we question, the problems we see, and our hopes for course corrections and solutions. In both things we say in interviews and in audio essays, they are reflective of our personal opinions. Some may agree with these perspectives, others not, and that's well and good. The more that people are talking about publishing, about books, and how books drive the global story economy, the better. But returning to the politics of it, I was thinking, if I had to guess, I would assume that the majority of Inkshares published writers of highly intelligent fiction with whom I've had the privilege of working and whom I have the privilege of calling friends vote Democrat or the equivalent party in their home country. Some, though, I suspect lean rightward. I can't say that for sure because my focus has always been on the intelligence of their fiction rather than an interrogation of their politics. Did anyone ever talk about Cormac McCarthy's politics? No, and that's a good thing. Most of this essay is apolitical. There are no real politics of video games or expansion cable or attention span or, in the most part, even romantasy. But it's also accurate to say that, in some parts, this essay critiques the damage done by what some call hyperliberalism, or wokeness, or cultural Marxism, or runaway performative politics, what should be publishing as a free market of ideas and expression. The point of gatekeeping should not be to promulgate a new political orthodoxy, but rather to elevate the best crafted, most intelligent, and most interesting expression of ideas, whether in fiction or nonfiction, because they are co-equal explorations of the world and our place in it. The point of a good book is to make us think. not tell us what to think. That shouldn't be political. And to the degree that it is, that's a sign of how sadly downstream our culture is from our politics today. The free market of ideas and expression is critical to publishing the best books, including the smartest books, and restoring the robustness of reading at a time in which it faces unprecedented competition from alternative forms of media. The book has not been the primary form of cheap, portable, and hopefully premium entertainment in nearly 2 decades, even though it remains the building block of the larger global story economy still. A new hardcover today costs about the same as the monthly subscription of Spotify Premium and no ads Netflix combined. For the book, not one read by a narrator or adapted for screen, just the book, to remain a meaningful part of the media bundle that we consume, the industry needs to recognize its deficiencies across the vertical that delivers books to readers and reform. All we have with which to dazzle people is the written word. So it needs to be great. And that greatness is found in the cauldron of competition unfettered by our politics. An industry that alternates between pseudo-porn and pseudo-propaganda, each stupid and degrading and damaging in their own way, will find itself selling decreasingly charismatic products to an increasingly small section of consumers. Ain't that a shame for both a generation of readers and what will be a generation of stillborn careers of young people entering what was once a halcyon industry? I've been lucky to meet many of the publishing greats, and I wonder how many of the equally talented future aspirants to their positions will never get a real start because of contraction. That's a bad thing. We need more young people today trying to cultivate and sell thought maxing in a world of looks maxing. And there it is. While dumb seems to have taken root on both left and right, the politics of intelligent fiction doesn't have a party. So whether you are in the center or whether you lean left or right, whether your greatest fear is COVID or the COVID vaccine, beef tallow or seed oil, the Mossad or the Mossad, see you on Inkshares. We can't wait to read your pages.